Today I'm out in Sonoma, California with the 2024 Nissan Z Nismo. Yes, it is Z Nismo, not Nismo Z, in case you're wondering. This is, I think, the Z that Nissan should have launched with. Because some folks were saying when the Z originally launched, it's not hardcore enough, it's not track focused enough. The rear end, doesn't have quite as much grip as they might like. And the answer to that is the new Nismo. You'll see we have the Nismo logo there up front and a different front end design than we find in the rest of the Z lineup in the US. The honeycomb grille there, more cooling going on because indeed there is more cooling for the engine. Red stripe down there along the bottom. Let me know what you think about this design. I think this is more attractive than the rest of the Z lineup in the US. That has been somewhat controversial with its sort of boxy opening. I think that the Japanese market Nissan Z looks a little bit better. The rest of the sheet metal, that's basically the same. The front end changes a little bit. The red stripe continues all the way around the side, including the side view mirror here, but then we find big changes on each of the corners. This is probably one of the larger changes, actually. We have Dunlop SP Sport Max summer tires. These are definitely very, very grippy summer tires. Still a staggered tire setup, so 255s in the rear, 285s in the back. But these new tires have significantly more grip, and I think better track potential than the outgoing tire. The feel on the track is certainly better. You notice we have these itty-bitty little subtle fender flares right there, front and back, wrapping around to the rear. Again, that red light, but the same rear tail light modules and turn signals, etc., that we find in the rest of the Nissan Z lineup. Nismo logo again in the back with the red O there, and a revised rear bumper, of course, to help improve aero, help reduce lift on the track. We find a relatively attractive and subtle, I would say, sort of ducktail spoiler right there on top of everything. Nissan didn't just swap in grippier tires, they also swapped in some lighter weight wheels with the unique design, of course, for the Nismo. Bigger brakes, that's definitely an important change if you want to track your vehicle. So we get larger rotors and larger calipers up front. Then they tweak the suspension bushings and the suspension tuning, so the ride is going to be a little bit firmer, but they've also improved the stiffness of the suspension and the stiffness of the entire chassis itself. No performance trim would be complete without a performance bump, so of course we find one under here. It's the same 3-liter twin-turbo V6 we find in the rest of the Z lineup with 420 horsepower, 384 pound-feet of torque. That's about 20 ponies more and 34 pound-feet more than the regular Z. The other change is more controversial than that. We don't get a manual transmission anymore. If you want a manual, you can get that in the performance version of the Z or the base version of the Z. If you want the Nismo, it's going to be 9-speed automatic only. Now, it's not the same 9-speed that you find in the rest of the Z lineup. What Nissan did was they took that transmission and replaced 4 of the 6 clutch units inside with beefier clutches that enable faster shifts, less slip, etc. So they claim that the shifts on the new 9-speed automatic transmission are 50% faster than on the outgoing transmission. Now, rather unfortunately, you will only get that improved 9-speed in the Nismo at this point in time, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's made its way across the Z lineup at some point in the future. Depending on exactly what you're doing with the Z, this may be minorly faster than the outgoing model because of the faster shifts and just a little bit of extra power, but it's probably not going to be too noticeable because the Z Nismo is actually a hair heavier than the regular Z because of the improved cooling. And that's really the story here. Nissan wanted to make this more of a track-focused vehicle, and that doesn't mean 0 to 60 improvements. That means track durability improvements, improved cooling, improved durability of the transmission, improved braking, etc. for those longer track runs, but not necessarily drag strip runs. As you'd expect, most of this interior is the same as the regular Z, but we do get some updates. We get a tweaked steering wheel with leather on the top and leather on the bottom of the steering wheel, ultra suede sections on the side, and that red indicator to let you know which side is up. Big shift paddles on the back of the steering wheel right there. We also get a slightly tweaked instrument cluster software package for the Nismo. Mainly the Nismo logo and the red accents. The rest of this is largely the same. I do appreciate the gauges that we get in here. We get engine temperature, water temperature, transmission oil temperature. We also get differential oil temperature, and that's all in addition to this gauge pod in the middle of the dashboard where we have turbo pressure, turbo speed. That's kind of cool because it does have a speed sensor there, and then battery voltage right there. Same big touch screen in the middle of the dashboard. You'll notice the additional red accents down here, and then of course the fact that we just have that regular automatic transmission shifter. It still does have kind of an unusual cup holder arrangement where we have one good cup holder there and then one cup holder kind of under that armrest. The other big change is in the seat arrangement here. You'll notice we have what looks like a 5-point harness seat, but it's not actually 5-point harness capable. If you really do need to have the harnesses, then you would have to upgrade these seats yourself aftermarket, but it gives you that impression. It's an attractive design. It is a Recaro seat. It has Nismo right there on the headrest, and then pretty aggressive shoulder bolstering and seat bottom cushion bolstering. So it definitely keeps you in place for sportier driving. We of course get some additional accents around, like the ultra suede material over there on the doors, and then stitched materials over here on the dashboard. No ultra suede continue on that section, and then rubbery plastics on the upper portion of the dash. As with so many vehicles that have Recaro seats, you do lose the power functionality if you choose the Nismo version. So otherwise you'd have some power controls right here on the inboard side, because the Z otherwise would have a part manual, part power seat. If you plan on tracking your Z Nismo, which Nissan says some people will, you should keep in mind if you're taller than I am, you might not be able to wear a helmet in here. It was pretty tight for me. You'll notice that in the drive section. If you had a really slim helmet, maybe it would be a little bit better, but this is as far down as the driver's seat goes. All right, it's time to get the Z out on the road. The first thing you're probably not going to notice is the extra 20 horsepower, because that's not a huge percentage increase over the 400 horsepower regular model. And I was able to drive both the performance version and this Nismo version today. You won't really notice the extra power or the extra torque, but you will notice this 9-speed automatic transmission, because it has been revised versus what you're going to find in the performance trim or the base model. The shifts are definitely faster and definitely snappier if you're in the sport mode and you're using the paddles on the back of the steering wheel here. It definitely is more engaging than the other version. The shifts are not lightning fast. This is not dual clutch quick, but it is still pretty darn fast. And I think that's a solid improvement that I would like to see in the rest of the Z lineup, because this fits the character of the vehicle perhaps a little bit better. Now, speaking of character, that's probably the big thing to know about the Z. This marches to a slightly different drummer than the Supra. This feels a little bit larger and a little bit heavier out on this road, but still very well sorted. And these tires are a much better fit to the Z than the ones that come from the factory. This doesn't squeal or anything like that when you're pushing it a little harder out on your favorite winding mountain road like this. Everything comes together definitely better than the regular Z. That was a common complaint from drivers. I've heard it over and over again. They just thought that the Z needed more grip. That's obviously something you can do with aftermarket tires on a regular Z, but Nissan has solved that here with the Nismo version right from the factory. So if you want that factory-tuned precision, factory-tuned performance, you want to get this Nismo over self-tuning your Z. But honestly, you can get pretty close by just swapping these tires into the performance trim. You aren't, however, going to get the other improvements that we find in the Nismo, the extra chassis stiffening, the extra longitudinal stiffness in the suspension, or the bushing changes that we find on this suspension, etc. Some of that can be swapped in, but not all of it. Like the Supra, the Z is just an absolute hoot to drive, and a very different kind of driving experience than a Mustang or a Camaro, especially something like a Challenger, because that is absolutely enormous in comparison. The fact that you're practically sitting on the rear axle and you have a reasonably long hood in front of you definitely gives you this feel that the entire world is pivoting around you when you're on your favorite winding mountain road like this. It has just an absolutely great feel to it. Now, is this better or worse than a Supra? That's really more of a personal preference in my opinion. I like the fact that this marches to a different drummer, and it's undeniably a Nissan and undeniably a Z. And the Supra, you know, it's a Toyota that speaks with a German accent, and that's not quite what I'm after if I'm after the purity of a particular sports brand. A lot of Supra fans have been a bit disappointed. Now, don't get me wrong, the Supra handles exceptionally well, but does it feel like a Toyota? The best answer is sometimes. The Z, it's undeniably Nissan. Yes, the transmission has a bit of a German accent, but you're not really going to be hearing that over the sound of this Nissan 3-liter twin-turbo 6, which sounds absolutely fantastic on the road and off the road. And you know what? Japanese engine, Japanese car, German transmission, I'm really okay with that combination. If you're really torn between the Z Performance and the Z Nismo, ride quality could be a deal breaker for some, especially if you're daily driving this. For some shoppers, ride quality is going to be a determiner as to whether you should get this or the performance version. The Nismo definitely feels firmer out on the road. Clearly that makes it better for carving corners like this. There is almost no body roll, almost no tip and dive. This has a very direct feel, very responsive steering with great turn-in as well. but it's not going to be as comfortable for your daily commute as the performance version. You will certainly feel that over freeway expansion joints, on rougher road surfaces, etc. Even out on this pretty smoothly paved mountain road, you will certainly feel all those little imperfections come through into the cabin. But the Nismo is all about track time, so now it's time to get this out on the track. Nissan really wanted us to be able to compare the Nismo version of the Z to the regular Z, so that's what we're doing. Right now, I'm in a Z Performance, so not the base version of the Z, but one step up from there. And then a little bit later, we'll be driving out here on Sonoma Raceway in the Z Nismo. The first thing you'll notice about the regular Z is that it's pretty lively in the back. One thing I've commented on before, especially after driving the Z on some different tires, is that the stock tires are a little less grippy than I would like for a vehicle like this, and that's part of the change for the Nismo version. So this definitely feels a little bit squirrely now and then, but if you're really after those strong rear-wheel drive driving dynamics, if you really want to have fun in your car, this is the kind of vehicle that can definitely step out on you. It is an awful lot of fun to drive, even in this regular version. Now, one thing I've always thought to myself is certainly if you're after a track-focused car in this segment, then maybe something like a dark horse, maybe something like a Supra is going to be a better fit. And that is what Nissan wants to change with the Nismo version. So let's see how this goes. You know, it doesn't have an inline-six sound like you'd find in a BMW, but this engine sounds fantastic, and it always has. It sounds great in the Infiniti Red lines, the Q50, the Q60, of course here in the Z. This just has a really great sound to it, something that Nissan's always done a good job at, whether we're talking about their naturally aspirated V6Zs or, of course, the classic inline-six Zs. Well, I might wish that Nissan had designed an all-new inline-six engine for the Red Sports and for the Z. This is just such a great engine. Now, admittedly, when it comes to the power level, I am a little bit surprised that Nissan did not milk more power out of this 3-liter V6. A lot of manufacturers out there are getting 500 horsepower out of their 3-liter turbo engine. And with all the technology that Nissan has added here, you know, I have to say, 420 horsepower just is not as exciting as far as the number sound versus some of those more high horsepower options out there, some of those higher horsepower options. You will definitely get that different feel in something like the Mustang Dark Horse with its naturally aspirated V8 engine. And of course, the Supra is absolutely fantastic with that BMW inline-six. All right, now I'm in the Nismo, so it's time to see what the difference is. Remember that the Nismo is a little bit heavier than the regular Z, so this may or may not be faster depending on the kind of drag strip work you're doing, whether you use launch control, etc. We get 20 more horsepower, but we do get a little bit more curb weight. On the other hand, this is more track focused, so the bushings, the suspension changes, the tire changes, etc., all that should lead to a more cohesive track experience. Let's see how that actually goes. Grip levels of the tire definitely seems to be better as well. So still pretty cold tires because we're the first group in the morning and these tires have yet to be driven. But so far it definitely feels tighter. Sport Plus mode definitely holds the revs longer than Sport mode did, so that different mode in the transmission is kind of handy. Now, Nissan claims that this transmission shifts faster. It's actually not the same transmission. We have more clutch material and more clutch plates in some of the gear sets. That helps improve the grip, helps reduce slipping, and it allows them to speed up those shifts versus the regular transmission. With the kind of braking that we're doing here, you're probably not going to notice the difference between the upgraded Nismo brakes, but if you are flogging your car on a track, time after time after time, you're probably going to start noticing the difference between the brakes that we find here and the brakes that we found on that performance model. Grip levels from these tires definitely better. You'll certainly notice that as you go into these corners. The turn-in is definitely more aggressive, the grip levels are higher, definitely is more confidence-inspiring. All right, it's time to give launch control a whirl, so we're gonna go ahead and line up on this drag strip here. So now we're in Sport Plus mode. We put our foot on the brake, pull both paddles, floor it, says launch control. Now we go. And yep, it definitely controls that rear axle. miles, about 116 or so, maybe 120 if I got that quarter-mile timing just about right. Even though track duty is what the Z is all about, back out on the road, it again is certainly tons and tons of fun. So if driving enjoyment is what you're after, yeah, get the Nismo, but is there a better option? Is there a better deal? Let's find out. Now to the nitty-gritty. How much is the Nismo going to set you back? Well, hold on to your hats because it is a little pricier than I had expected personally. $64,990 plus destination gets you to $66,085. That is about $12,000 more than the Z Performance, and that's a pretty big bump for some Recaro seats and an extra 20 horsepower with an automatic transmission, at least in my book. Yes, it is far more sorted on the track, but I am forced to wonder, how sorted could you get the Z Performance with $12,000 on your own? And would it feel like this does on the track? This definitely feels different, and I'm glad that Nissan allowed us to play with both models on the track so we really could compare and we really could see what the difference is like. My trouble is it $12,000 worth of difference? Or is it $20,000 worth of difference because the base Z is about $20,000 less than this? On the other hand, it's about the same price as a Toyota Supra 45th Anniversary Edition, and that is logically the direct competitor to the Z Nismo. So price-wise, I think it's right in the right neighborhood, but again, I'm forced to wonder, the regular Z is such a fantastic deal, wouldn't I rather have a regular Z and $20,000 for my own modifications and my own performance improvements on it? Just hypothetically here, stay with me, if you bought a regular Z, the base model, you could get a manual transmission, and then you could spend $20,000 on upgrades. You could swap in new tires, you could swap in new brakes, you could add a performance ECU that would give you about 500 horsepower from this same 3-liter 6-cylinder engine. You wouldn't have the limited slip differential, you wouldn't have the upgraded brakes, but that's okay because you could upgrade them yourself aftermarket. You obviously would be violating your warranty when you ECU upgraded and then blew it up on a track, but you'd still have probably about $10,000 to buy another engine, have it hanging out just as a spare, and you may have spent a little bit less actually than this particular Nismo. You could even import the front bumper from the Japanese market Z, which I do think is the more attractive front end, and you would have something perhaps a little bit more special on the road as well. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. I would say, any way you slice it, you should definitely go with the Z. I'm a little bit controversial in this statement, I know. A lot of folks have said they prefer the Supra. I actually prefer the Z over the Supra. The Supra is a better sports car in some ways. It does feel a bit better out on the road. It just doesn't feel like a Supra, and it doesn't feel like a Toyota. And that's why I've always loved the Z, because this is 100% Nissan. Well, I guess mostly Nissan, because the 9-speed automatic transmission is not actually a Nissan design, but that's totally fine. Everything else about the Z is thoroughly Nissan and definitely unique with a different personality than the Supra. So if my money were on the line, I would be really torn between getting something like this Nismo Z, Z Nismo, or getting a performance trim and doing maybe about $5,000 worth of modifications myself aftermarket. Again, let me know what you think about that down there. And of course, stay tuned because hopefully I will have one of these at home for a full week just as soon as I possibly can. See all of you later.